Welcome to Belief Busters Podcast, where we change the world one belief at a time. True transformation happens when we question if the beliefs we hold are of truth, or simply someone else's belief that we have internalized as our own. I'm your host, Rev. Cherie Taylor-Jones, and I'm glad you could join us on the journey. Today on Belief Busters, we have Amy Nordhues, who is going to be our guest. She is a survivor of both childhood sexual abuse and sexual abuse as an adult at the hands of a mental health professional. She is a passionate Christ follower and expert on the healing God provides. Amy has a BA in psychology with minors in sociology and criminology. Her devotions have been published in The Secret Place, which is published by Judson Press. She blogs at amynordhues.com, a married mother of 3, and Amy has recently written a memoir entitled Preyed Upon, Breaking Free from Therapist Abuse. Amy, really glad that you're here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And we're going to have a really interesting conversation. I've asked Amy to be with us to look at the religious indoctrination that many of us grow up learning about, being indoctrinated into, and then how she was able to kind of shift those beliefs. So my first question to you, Amy, is what are the indoctrinated beliefs you learned as a kid?
Growing up, we were in church every Sunday, and I would have to say that my relationship with God early on was one of kind of guilt and a little bit of fear. I felt like, you're a bad person if you don't go to church. You're a bad person if you don't follow certain religious rules and customs that we had. We were to go to confession, not eat meat on Fridays during Lent, give up something for Lent. These are all the things I grew up, hearing people talk about, but I just didn't know how to make it real for me. I heard a lot too about, praying the rosary, and there was just, and praying to saints. And there was just so much that I didn't understand and that I couldn't grasp. And I felt like there was something wrong with me that I couldn't, be more on board with that, or I couldn't, like, it didn't come alive for me like it seemed like it did for other people. It just sort of felt empty to me, kind of meaningless to me. And, as far as the fear, I can remember having nightmares as a kid that my entire family would go to heaven and I would go to hell. Wow. And I don't know, why I felt that way, but I certainly was very worried at a young age to make sure I was on the right side. And I didn't really know what that meant. I just wanted to make sure, does that make sense, that yes, I was, kind of doing the right thing. And I never knew if I was pleasing God, and I hoped I was, and worried a lot about that, very conscientious, as I grew up. And then as I got older, I kind of felt like this is exhausting. This is stressful. I don't even know, like, God, if you're happy with me or not. I assume you are, because I try to be a good person. I try to go to church. But I started feeling a little bit, maybe acting out a little bit. I can remember in college, and I mean, this is kind of funny to me now, but I would eat meat on Fridays during Lent.
You rule breaker.
And I'm not a rule breaker. That's the thing, is that I desperately want to do the right thing always. But I know that I was doing that because I was trying to, some part of me deep down was like crying out, like, God, it's got to be more than this. I don't understand. I don't understand you. And I prayed, but I didn't think God could answer us. And I began to feel more and more resentful about that too, because I thought, God, I just don't know that I agree with this whole setup you have here. All the pain and suffering that we go through here on earth. And I felt like I didn't sign up to be here, and I'm supposed to feel grateful all the time for you, but you don't answer me. And I don't, So I ended up being becoming very angry, and resentful towards God, and kind of shutting him out, later in life. And at the same time, desperately wanting him to be happy with
Yes.
me, and
Yes.
desperately wanting him to be proud of me. And so I was always being kind of pulled back and forth like that, scared to do the wrong thing, frustrated when I was doing the right thing because it didn't seem to matter. I can remember when my sister passed away, it was 2010. And that just kind of, I was already struggling with depression from a lot of sexual abuse that I'd encountered as a child
Hmm.
and as a young person. And one of those being a priest, which, obviously heaped on even more anger
Hmm.
towards God and the church. But when my sister passed away, I got even more depressed. And I can just remember telling God, like, I'm done. I don't, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want any part of this whole life thing anymore. I don't care if I go to heaven. I don't care where I go. I just don't, I cannot keep fighting. Like, I cannot keep going. I was exhausted.
Hmm.
Like trying to please, and that is when I feel like there was sort of a change in my life spiritually. I eventually found Celebrate Recovery in 2012, started really addressing my anger and my depression and my relationship with God in a way that I never had, and started attending the non-denominational church where that was hosted, and felt like I was going to be struck by lightning for even being in a non-denominational
Right.
church.
Yep.
For a long time, I haven't thought about this in a while since you and I are talking, but for a long time, I wanted to make sure that I was covered. So I wondered if I should go to my Catholic church and go to this church just to make sure. Because, like I said, I wanted to do the right thing, you
Right.
know. And if this non denominational church was helping me, that was great. But I also wanted to make sure that I was doing real church.
Yeah, I've got to tell you that one of the reasons that I was so excited about this conversation is the parallel way that our lives and the journey kind of intertwined. It's really interesting because as you discuss the angst over doing the right thing and not having that, not feeling that spiritual connection to something greater than ourselves, I remember all of the questions that I had in my own upbringing as well of, I don't understand how God could be this mean, vengeful, you know, God, right? It's
Yeah.
that there's this level of x-ray vision of your mind, of your thoughts, of your actions. So even I learned even having a thought was a sin. From that perspective, I just felt like I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't.
Yes. And there were so many, when I was younger, there were so many religious people that were cruel. And I started being triggered by people that said they were Christian, or that were too religious. That was a red flag for me
Yes.
at some point. And, I didn't, I, I learned a little bit about the Bible, but not a lot. And certainly what I heard in church on Sunday didn't ever come alive for me. There was this whole other world out there that I had never knew about. Like I had never listened to Christian music or read Christian books in general. And so when I started attending this church, it was like there was this whole other world out there. It was like
Mm-hmm.
amazing. I didn't even really know it existed. And my mom taught me about God, and my mom always prayed, and I prayed too, but I didn't know that it could be interactive. I felt like my mom was so spiritual that God answered her, but I just thought I didn't do it right. And
Yes.
because I was done trying to talk to God. He was not answering me. And then, starting this process and realizing that he's right there with me and he can answer me, it was absolutely mind blowing to me. Like, I was in my early 40s, and I was like a little kid. Like, I can remember having the first time I really had an answered prayer where I really could feel God answering me. I couldn't believe it. And I was just wondering if ever other people know this. And like, I can remember going back to my Celebrate Recovery group and telling them, like, did y'all know this? And, everybody else, they were just looking at me like I was crazy. And I was like, no, like he actually like answered me like, I'm not even kidding. And it was like, it was so amazing. And it was just like my life started going from black and white to color, because I was like, well, now this I can work with. Now I can feel, God, that you love me, and you're here with me and you're talking with me. And, it was just a game changer for me. And I became a really wacky person. Like I, not really, but, it was such a relief, and it was so exciting to me that I just became just a passionate believer. And I know it was kind of weird for my husband and my children at first, but really all I was doing was reading my Bible more. But I had hope for the first time. It changed everything for me, because there's the traumas that I went through that cast me into a dark place. But what was even darker than that was being without Jesus. And, I know that I had a wall of anger and bitterness. And I mean, I know that I played a role in blocking him out and not being able to hear him. But I thought, the two of us together, now I can handle things.
Do you think that the process of you being angry with God was significant in shifting the beliefs that you thought were truth before?
Yes, I think that I was terrified to do that. And it kept me stuck. Like I was too afraid to be angry with God, but yet I was outraged with him. And I agree. I do think that kept me trapped for a long time, unable to move forward, because I dared not voice that anger. And ironically, I think God can really get through to us when we just let him have it. And he wants us, raw and unfiltered. That's what he wants. And I was too afraid to do that. I mean, church was formal and fancy and serious. And, I just didn't know there was this kind of father with arms wide open, there waiting for me. So yes, I do. I went through, I think going through that period and just telling him flat out how I felt was the beginning, because it was like, I don't get you. I don't get any of this. And I'm done trying, and I'm exhausted. And I hate this whole plan you have. If I'm understanding it correctly, which I wasn't, then
Yes.
I think it's a terrible plan and unfair. And the Bible's supposed to be my guide, and I don't even understand what it means. That's real funny. And I mean, I just let him have it. I really did. And that's probably where it started.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just want to tell you and our listeners that I think that's a vital piece of our awakening spiritually, because I believe that when we are kids, when we first come into the world, we understand God, and we understand this loving, energetic presence that we just came from. I really believe that. And then as we're little and we're indoctrinated into society and how society works and how religion works, all of those rules come in, which then starts programming us to think differently. And then there's this real spiritual part of us that knows no matter what other people are saying, that concept of God, there's something wrong there. That doesn't connect. But we're so overloaded with all of these wanting to please our parents. We want to, we want them to be proud of us. We want God to be proud of us. And so, we fall into following the guidelines that were given. Right. And I think getting angry and really going to a personal conversation with God is really the beginning of that spiritual journey. Really the beginning of saying, I want to feel that connection, that love, knowing that I am in the arms of the beloved, and I am your beloved and you are my beloved. And it can't happen unless we are willing to get real. And a lot of that is the anger of not having that connection, of not feeling that level of grace. So I just think it's I want our listeners to know that that is really important, and it's okay, and you can be angry at God and say whatever you need to say.
Yeah. I agree with you, because I can remember being really little, and I would picture God as being huge, and I would sit on his lap, and his lap would be so big that I wouldn't run into anybody else, like it was just me, and I could just kind of climb around. And I feel like it's sad, because I think, like you said, it's a lot of other people's beliefs that we hear and we pick up that start to confuse us and warp our ideas of God, and we kind of forget who we used to know him as. I can remember being in a Catholic school and hearing, I was as an employee, and I heard one of the little kindergartners say, after they watched a video, will so-and-so end up going to hell? And the teacher said, well, I don't know, but he'll certainly have to say a lot of rosaries. And everything in my being, that's the anger that I was rebelling against, where I was taking it out on God. I was really angry that it was so wrong, and that's not okay, and that's abusive, and that isn't who God is. But then, you get older and you think, well, I don't know, maybe it is how he is, because, he's not answering me, and I'm not really sure anymore. But it's all these just behavior, performance driven. And like I said, I just got to a point where I was like, I'm going to do the opposite of these rules, because part of me, deep down, it's not sitting with me. It's not representing the God that I thought that I think maybe part of our spirit knows.
Yes. Yes, I do.
And kind of like saying, well, kind of like you test your parents when you're a kid, it's like, so do you still love me? And that's kind of what we're looking for. And of course he's saying, yes, of course I do. Religion in my life, from what I've witnessed and experienced, religion is probably the number one deterrent that I have found for a close relationship with Jesus. Now, I do know people that grew up in my same religion and in other religions that found Jesus, and they're lucky and they did. So I'm not saying that it's across the board. It was just my experience and my personality and, my particular, just the way that I interact, I guess, with God and the world. It's been hard for me.
Mm-hmm. I really do understand what you're saying. And I think it's strange for me as a minister to say I agree with you totally, in that religion has been used to control the masses for such a long time. When Jesus was here, the church was this mystical experience of God. And then it evolved to becoming this very patriarchal reward and punishment type of religion. And most religions are based on that, kind of format. So I agree with you that formal religions can be such a blocker to having those mystical spiritual experiences, knowing that we can directly have that loving experience of knowing that we are no longer alone, that we are part of the divine, that we are here to simply grow and experience and evolve into the light that we truly are, Yeah. So I love what you just said there. I think it's powerful. Join us next time on Belief Busters for the conclusion of this episode. If you are enjoying these conversations about assessing your belief systems and how to transform outdated beliefs, then please subscribe and give us a positive review. To support this podcast and its transformative work, you can also become a sponsor for as little as $5 a month. You can reach Rev Cherie at info@beliefbusterspodcast.org. To continue on this journey of evolution, you can also get my book, Turning Your Why into Why Not, at Amazon or any other bookstores which gives you practical tools to do this work. See you next time on the flip side.